This week, we're going to be discussing intelligence, both how to define intelligence as well as how to measure intelligence. And we'll also discuss some theories of intelligence, including the more contemporary theories of intelligence. As always, I encourage you to have the slides in front of you so that you can fill in the blanks as we go, and also so that you can take notes on any comments I make that are not included on the slides, as well as to take notes on the videos that are included in your module. Before we start discussing intelligence, I'd like for you to reflect on a couple of questions. First, how would you define intelligence? What does it mean to be intelligent, and do you think intelligence can be measured? Next, if a program or a class can help students learn to think better, have those students become more intelligent? Why or why not? We'll explore some of these topics throughout our lecture, and we'll end the lecture with a few new reflection questions. And it'll be interesting to see how some of your views might shift with new information. Let's start by covering what is intelligence. So first off, I want to say that intelligence is a highly controversial and debated topic. There really is no singular definition or approach to measurement. There are some intuitive ideas of what it means to be intelligent, but that varies across individuals. I've taught this class in person many times, and I've compiled some of the most common answers below so you can get an idea of what your peers come up with when they think of intelligence. I do want to note that a video that corresponds to this topic, Controversy of Intelligence, is available in your module. For those of you who would like to pause the recording to watch videos, this would be a good time to do that. So, what are some intuitive ideas of what it means to be intelligent? Some might say it's the ability to reason logically, quickly, and effectively. Some might also say it's the ability to hold a large amount of information in your mind at any given time. Or perhaps it's high-level reading comprehension and perceptual abilities. Or the ability to apply your knowledge in meaningful ways. To comprehend complex ideas and easily learn new information. Or perhaps to retain information for long periods of time. Some see it as the ability to innovate, to have creative approaches to problem solving. Or perhaps it's the ability to have deep insight into yourself and others, understanding emotions, having effective communication skills, the ability to be a great leader. So those are some things that intelligence might include, but what does it not include? Some things that haven't come up yet are rational thinking, critical thinking skills, the ability to notice biases and act accordingly, and risk assessment. Are there any factors that you would add or that you would change on this list? We'll start our discussion of intelligence theories with the theory of general intelligence, which was introduced by Charles Spearman in 1904. Spearman realized that some students do well across subjects more than others, and he referred to this as the G factor. G stands for general, so his idea was that some people are generally more intelligent than others. Raymond Cattell, nearly 83 years later, took it upon himself to develop the theory of general intelligence a bit further. He differentiated two subsets of general intelligence, which he referred to as fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence refers to the ability to perceive relationships independent of previous specific practice or instruction concerning those relationships. It's essentially the ability to think and reason abstractly and solve problems, to think and act quickly, solve novel problems, and encode short-term memories. Intelligence is used when the person doesn't already know what to do, and it's relatively independent of education. In contrast, crystallized intelligence stems from learning. It's reflected in tests of knowledge, general information, use of vocabulary, and acquired skills. it is directly affected by education, as well as by personality variables, motivation, and cultural opportunities. Cattell believed that intelligence is largely determined by genetics, and that high IQ individuals tend to have fewer children. Many have criticized his theory as having strong racist influences, but nonetheless, his theory continues to influence views on intelligence and will be discussed further in the contemporary views of intelligence that we'll discuss later on in this lecture. Cattell is also very famous for his development of factor analytic methods in the study of personality. If you've taken personality psychology, you might remember that he yielded a famous theory of 16 base traits of personality. So now that we know a little bit about intelligence, I want to talk about how intelligence is measured. So as we discussed in terms of theories, there really is no widely or clearly accepted definition or form of measurement when it comes to intelligence. Intelligence is measured with tests that have been standardized on large groups of people, but they're flawed in many ways. The term IQ is commonly used as a synonym for intelligence, and IQ stands for intelligence quotient. It was given that term because it was originally formulated for children by dividing their mental age by their physical age. The first IQ test was developed by Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon. It was used to place children in educational settings in France. The difficulty varied by age level. The Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon version of this test has been revised many times. Most recently, the revision by Louis Terman at Stanford University has been termed the Stanford Binet, and it is a very common approach to IQ measurement. The Stanford Binet is currently in its 5th edition and measures both fluid and crystallized intelligence. Another very popular IQ test was developed by David Wechsler. Wechsler has 2 intelligence scales. The Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, which is referred to as the WISC, is used for children who are 14 or below. The Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, which is referred to as the WAIS, is used for people who are 15 and over. The WAIS-4 is the most recent WAIS update. It has 5 scores, or 5 scales: verbal comprehension, working memory, perceptual reasoning, processing speed, and the full-scale IQ. There are many limitations of traditional IQ tests. Scores can be biased based on numerous factors. Some of these factors include differences in the quality of an academic background. For example, students who have gone to more privileged private schools that have smaller class sizes tend to get more academic knowledge and more academic rigor than students who are sharing their class with maybe 40 students or 50 students at a time. Exposure to enrichment activities. There are significant differences in the activities that children, and adults for that matter, have access to. For example, children who grow up playing instruments and sports and engaged in the arts tend to score higher on IQ tests compared to children who have not had as many opportunities. Additionally, there are differences in the amount of involvement in what are known as normative experiences. Normative experiences refer to those types of experiences that IQ tests assume the person has been exposed to. For example, an IQ test might ask you to put in order the steps of doing your laundry. Well, there are significant differences in how people go about approaching laundry. So if one of the steps involves putting the clothes in the dryer, and you've never seen a dryer because you've always used a clothesline outside, your processing speed is going to be slower. That's going to appear to be a reflection of your intelligence, but is actually just a reflection of differences in experience. Next, the degree of motivation and self-efficacy. Research strongly supports the interpretation that students or individuals in general who are not very motivated will not do as well on the test. It requires significant attention and effort. Additionally, self-efficacy, which refers to one's belief in their own ability to achieve, also impacts IQ scores. Students who believe that they will not do well tend to hinder their abilities. This can be due to a variety of reasons, but one of those reasons is anxiety. If you believe that you're not going to do well in something, you might be more worried about it. Another factor that tends to influence the level of anxiety is the pressure to achieve. Children who feel strong pressure to do well may actually inadvertently do less well because of that anxiety. That leads me to other differences, including difficulties with concentration, attention, verbal processing, and a variety of other factors that may impact test results. If you have trouble paying attention for long periods of time and you start to get fatigued or bored midway through the test, it's likely that your score is going to go down, but that's not a reflection of your actual intelligence as much as a reflection of either your ability or perhaps your motivation to sustain your attention for long periods of time. There's also variations in the test administrator and interpreter. It's really important that the examiner have good rapport with the test taker, but that's not always the case. If you feel nervous because the test taker seems mean or harsh, or perhaps speaks very quickly, and you don't believe that it's appropriate to ask questions or to request that they slow down, that will negatively impact your score, but isn't actually a reflection of your actual intellectual capabilities. IQ tests are subject to practice effects. So students and individuals, again for that matter, who take the test multiple times will achieve an inflated score, but that's due to practice effects, not necessarily a reflection of their actual intelligence. This is a particularly big problem if there's an error on the original test, and so they choose to redo it. The tests should not be readministered for a minimum of 12 months. Otherwise, the score might not actually reflect the individual's intellectual ability. There's also inconsistent scores across IQ tests. So to say that a person has an IQ of 130 might mean something different on the WAIS versus the Stanford Binet versus other intelligence tests like the Raven's progressive matrices. I should also mention that there are cultural differences in our responses to the things that come up during the test. For example, there are cultural differences in feelings about being rushed. Some people might find that motivating, and other people might find that really disturbing and problematic. What you see here is an image of a typical bell curve. The IQ scores fall neatly along the bell curve. So what you see here, that dotted line above 100, represents the average intelligence as a score of 100. 68% of human beings, if given an IQ test, will have an IQ score that falls between 85 and 115. That reflects one standard deviation above or below the average. That is depicted in the yellowish color, as you can see, between about 85 and 115. About 96% of humans will fall between two standard deviations. That is between a score of 70 and 130. The further from the average you go in either direction, the less likely the score is to occur. Only 4.2% of people will score between 55 and 70, or between 130 and 145. As I mentioned earlier, there are slight differences between scores on different IQ tests. So for example, on the Stanford Binet scale, 132 and above is classified as very superior. 121 to 131 is superior, 111 to 120 is high average, 89 to 110 is average, 79 to 88 is low average, 68 to 78 is a slow learner, and 67 or below is termed mentally retarded, which is an outdated term and should be considered as an intellectual disability. On the Wechsler scales, the WISC and the WAIS, 130 and above is classified as very superior. 120 to 129, superior. 110 to 119, high average. 90 to 109, average. 80 to 89, low average. 70 to 79 borderline, and 69 and below is considered extremely low. Some of you may be familiar with Mensa. Mensa is a group of individuals with high IQs. To qualify as a Mensa member, the score has to fall in the 98th percentile or higher on a standardized IQ test. For example, on the Stanford-Binet, the minimum score is a 132. On the Whisker-Wace, the full-scale IQ score must be a minimum of 130. Okay, let's get back to intelligence theories. I want to discuss the influence of Lev Vygotsky, who's a Russian psychologist who worked with disadvantaged children following the Russian Revolution. Fykovsky focused on the way people learn rather than achievements made in learning. He was really the first to theorize that intelligence is not static, which means it's not fixed. Basically the idea that intelligence can be developed and can be improved. He also developed the zone of proximal development theory, which is pictured in the bottom right corner. As you can see there, the purple refers to the child's current understanding. So the purple zone, so to speak, reflects what the child can do unassisted. The teal coloring, a little further out, is the zone of proximal development. Here the child can learn through scaffolding, so it's slightly out of their reach to do it on their own, but given the instruction and support, they are able to achieve what's in that teal zone. The furthest zone is the green zone, which is the out of reach zone. This reflects the types of activities and learning that the child is not yet ready for. But given time and support and ample opportunities for practice and education, eventually the child can reach that, first through scaffolding and then through current understanding. Essentially, Vygotsky theorized that new skills and new knowledge can improve intelligence. And this is particularly true in underfunded populations that do not have the same access to quality education as well as enrichment opportunities. Again, this information is based on children following the Russian Revolution, where children did not have very many opportunities to develop their intelligence. This is true around the early 1900s when Vygotsky was studying, and this is just as true today. Vygotsky influenced many contemporary theorists when it comes to intelligence. The first of the contemporary theories I want to discuss is Sternberg's theory of successful intelligence. Robert Sternberg theorized that successful intelligence is the ability to set and accomplish meaningful goals. There is ample consideration for cultural context in shaping these goals and in shaping the strategies to achieve them. Ideally, to have successful intelligence, the person can identify their own strengths and weaknesses and can use that knowledge to guide their decision-making. Essentially, the person can capitalize on their strengths and compensate for their weaknesses. These strengths and weaknesses fit into 4 categories. Creative intelligence, which refers to the ability to generate novel and useful ideas. Analytical intelligence, to ascertain whether those ideas are even good ones. Practical intelligence, to apply those ideas and convince others of the value. And then wisdom-based intelligence, to ensure implementation of ideas will help ensure the common good, that the person can reflect on and implement based on ethical principles. Many of you may have heard of the triarchic theory of intelligence. This is essentially the same, and they are both Sternberg theories, but Sternberg more recently added wisdom-based intelligence to his theory. So now there's a slight difference between the triarchic theory of intelligence and the theory of successful intelligence. The triarchic theory of intelligence was his original theory, but is limited to the 3 parts: creative, analytic, and practical. Sternberg argued, much like Vygotsky, that intelligence is not fixed, that it comprises a set of abilities that can be developed. There are many other contemporary theories, but I'm going to touch on 4 of them. First, I want to point out that there is a video in your module called Howard Gardner TED Talk. If you'd like, this would be a good time to pause the recording and watch that video. You might remember the name Cattell from earlier in this lecture presentation. Cattell worked with two other theorists, Horn and Carroll, and they developed the Cattell-Horn-Carroll CHC theory of intelligence. The CHC had a huge influence on the most recent revision of the Stanford-Binet, Revision 5, as well as the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children, Edition 2, and the Woodcock-Johnson, Edition 3. The CHC theory proposes 10 broad factors of intelligence and has gotten away from the idea of a general intelligence, so there's no longer a G factor, so to speak. The 10 broad factors of intelligence are fluid, quantitative, crystallized, reading and writing, short-term memory, visual processing, auditory processing, long-term storage and retrieval, processing speed, and decision speed and reaction time. Quantitative and reading and writing intelligences are not directly tested on IQ tests. Instead, they're tested with academic achievement tests. Decision speed and reaction time is not generally tested on IQ or achievement tests. Next, Luria's neuropsychological PASS model. PASS stands for planning, attention, simultaneous, and successive. What you should know about the PASS model is that there was a switch of emphasis from content to process, really with an emphasis on how problems are solved. Next is Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, the multiple intelligence theory, or MI theory for short. It proposes 8 intelligences, but is open-minded and explores the possibility of several others as well. Gardner defines intelligence as, quote, an ability or set of abilities that permit an individual to solve problems or fashion products that are of consequence in a particular cultural setting. It proposes 8 intelligences, as I said, and these include linguistics, logical mathematical, spatial, bodily kinesthetic, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. It includes others as well that are explored but are not explicitly part of the model, including things like spiritual intelligence and existential intelligence. He argues that logical mathematical intelligence and linguistic intelligence are overemphasized in traditional models of intelligence. Gardner based his theory on research literature rather than factor analysis, looking at things like evidence from brain damage, evidence from savants and prodigies, history, psychological studies, etc. There are really no strong psychometrically valid tests for these types of intelligence, but they're very popular and they're oftentimes integrated into classroom theories of education. Lastly, I want to talk about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence as a term actually originates from Peter Salovey and John Mayer, but was popularized by Daniel Goleman. So we'll talk about Goleman's theory of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, according to Goleman, has 5 central components. These include self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. EI essentially refers to the ability to perceive, access, and generate emotions, as well as to effectively regulate emotions. So what's the bottom line on intelligence? The research evidence strongly supports the interpretation that if we can learn to think better, and if using improved thinking skills can occur in a variety of settings, we can learn to be more intelligent. Now, this is limited by individual differences and genetics. The research shows that our genetic portion of our intelligence gives us basically a range that we might fall in. So let's say Johnny's genetic information allows him to have an IQ between, let's say, 100 and 115. If Johnny has a lot of enriching activities if he has good quality education, access to healthy food and exercise, and develops in a healthy way, maybe we'll end up on the higher end of that range, maybe with an IQ of 115. However, if he's exposed to a lot of trauma, a lot of stress, an unhealthy diet or malnutrition, impoverished education, lack of resources, etc., perhaps Johnny will fall closer to 100. Now, that's not to say Johnny is doomed to 100 forever. As we've learned throughout this lecture, he can improve his IQ with effort and practice. Essentially, if we have underdeveloped potential, we can learn how to improve our intelligence. Skills, strategies, heuristics, other things we'll learn in this course are all learnable skills. Therefore, they all represent learnable aspects of intelligence. So we're back to our reflection questions. In what ways have your thoughts about intelligence changed since you started this lecture presentation? Would your definition of intelligence change? If so, how would you define intelligence now? Based on what you've learned, what characteristics do you think most contribute to someone's intelligence? You'll also have a chance to reflect on your thoughts related to our second class discussion this week about intelligence. I really look forward to hearing what you have to say about it.